Thank you, everybody, for participating in our fireside this evening on Sunday, June 7th, 2020. The theme is innovation, using Baha'i principles to make the invisible visible. Um, Einstein has said we should not try to solve problems with the kind of thinking that created the problem. This requires us to innovate. And so three questions emerge. What are the driving forces of innovation? Second, how can we make the invisible become visible to innovate? And third, how does innovation promote an ever advancing civilization? Our guest speaker this evening is Robert Bob Rosenfeld. He is the founder and CEO of Idea Connection Systems. For over 40 years, Bob has been a leader and practitioner in the human dynamics that make innovation happen inside organizations. He created the first Office of Innovation ever to be successfully implemented in corporate America in 1978 at Eastman Kodak. In 2001, he directed the development of Mosaic Partnerships, a process for breaking down barriers between cultures. In 2006, he was named the Center for Creative Leadership's first Innovator in Residence, and in 2008, he was awarded Innovator in Residence Emeritus status. Bob is the author of Making the Invisible Visible, The Human Principles of Sustaining Innovation. His second book, co-authored by Gary Wilhelmi and written by Andrew Harrison, is titled The Invisible Element, a practical guide for the human dynamics of innovation. In 2008 and 2011, he was the recipient of the Excellence in Innovation Award at the Indira India Innovation Summit. And for his leadership in the area of race relations, he was awarded the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Peace Award for his work on Mosaic Partnerships in 2004. And in November of 2019, he received the Race Amity Medal of Honor, which is conferred on individuals who have engaged in close cross-racial, cross-cultural collaboration to advance access, equity, and social justice in society. So thank you, Bob, and welcome to the fireside.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'd like to talk about leveraging the invisible human elements that make innovation happen and literally applying Baha'i principles to be able to see that. So what I'd like to do, start off with, is how do you understand how to make innovation happen? Well, here's a statement by Einstein that said, we should not try to solve problems with the kind of thinking that created the problem. Well, that means that it's required for us to innovate, to create new. So what I'm going to be talking about, what are the driving forces for innovation? How can we make the invisible human elements visible to foster innovation? And how does innovation promote an ever-advancing civilization? So giving you a little background, as Vafa did on me, just give you a short timeline of looking at this. I'm a research chemist by training. I have a number of patents and research disclosures. I invented the first Office of Innovation of its kind back when Kodak used to exist, and literally generated about $2.3 billion worth of business. In addition to that, you can see a number of other things that are here. One of them, which I'd like to mention because Vafa just talked a little bit about this, one of them is called Mosaic Partnerships, which we developed back in 2001 in the city. What we were doing was reducing the racial polarization that existed in the city, and the mayor set up a commission to take a look at this, and what they came back with was sign a petition, life would be good, everyone will not be prejudiced anymore. Unfortunately, that never works. So they called on us to come in, and we helped set up a system by which to do this, which the friendships of the people that started back in 2000, 2001, to this day, many of them still exist. And it was cross racial and ethnic lines. From doing it in Rochester, we then went to Greensboro. We've done it in Milwaukee. We did it in large companies like ExxonMobil, etc. But I wasn't going to talk about that. But raising what's going on, it's very important to be able to apply the understanding of the invisible human elements that make up a person, because we get confused with what's visible. And if we match the invisible, we can actually have people communicate with each other and bridge the gaps that they generally can't. If anyone wants to know more about that, be my pleasure. But as you can see from there, a couple other things, serving at the Center for Creative Leadership, for some of us that know that place. I was their first innovator in residence, and they, in turn, are now using the ISPI that some of you have taken and using it globally. What's important about things here is that we as an organization really deal with the human dynamics that make innovation happen. And I'm going to get more into that. Some of the companies we've been involved in, you can see them here, but for over odd years, you can see the ones that are there. Many of them you probably know. Not only do we involve with the private companies and globally, but also with many of the public companies, public organizations, such as NASA, or just such as the Army, or the Air Force, or universities that are present. And with this comes an understanding of who we are. Now, saying that, that really doesn't tell you much about who I am, and here's why. I'm not going to go into a resume and all that other stuff, but I want to share with you something here. Can anyone see who the person is on the left-hand side? Anyone see that person? Does anyone know his name? Anyone? Gee, that person is Superman, Christopher Reeves, right? Shake your head. Yep, that's right. The person on the right you don't know is my uncle Saul. He was president of DC Comic Books. Superman, Batman, made the movies, did the books and stuff like that. But very importantly for me, at the age of 8, between 8 and 10, my uncle would, when we had holidays with the family, take us into a room, and he would have us brainstorm, which we didn't know that word, brainstorm different products and services that would be useful. And we would argue with each other about this. My uncles would come in, my aunts would come in, and we'd have these clashing of different opinions and come up with something. And we did this on a regular basis. And as I went through it, my uncle also took me on trips with him to business meetings. So I went in, anyone ever hear of Mad Magazine? Mad Magazine was part of DC Comic Books. And I remember going to a meeting with my uncle, walking into Mad Magazine, and all the people that were working there were standing on the table, jumping up and down, trying to create the next thing they had to deal with. So as a kid, I began to realize creativity had clashes. Creativity and meetings that took place had to really deal with the differences of people in order to make things work. So my uncle gave me a great gift in being able to see that and do it. That's more about me than most other things, regardless of whether all the inventions and stuff, because that lives within me. So if I go ahead and I look at creativity, defining some of this, creativity is the generation of novel ideas. Innovation is when I take those novel ideas, or that creative act, and result in a quantifiable. A quantifiable gain is not necessarily money alone. It could be an increase in the number of students. It could be the graduating. It could be techniques that allow us to do that. The creativity is the generation of that novel thought. When I convert it into the quantifiable gain, we have a lot more creativity than we have innovation. But it's important to be able to understand the distinction between it to convert the creativity to the innovation. So in making innovation happen, and you start thinking about it, it doesn't happen spontaneously. You really can't in an organization mandate it. There's a lot of complexity with it, processes, in people, in projects, and leadership. All of that needs to be able to be understood and made visible what was invisible. While you're doing it, what you have to do is identify the right people for the right projects and the right type of innovation. which I will talk to you a little bit about, as well as the leadership of the organization has to fit this well. Over the years, we have developed tools that help us make visible those invisible things that are necessary. So understanding this and understanding the Baha'i principles, which basically are embedded in me because of having been a Baha'i for, close to 50 years, it set a tone. And I think it's understanding how the principles that exist literally allow us to innovate. For example, especially in the world we live in now, when we look at it, the human dynamics that are part of my faith is, for example, the oneness of humankind, really understanding that the invisible nature that makes us all up across the globe, our elements are the same. How they manifest themselves differ depending on the culture you happen to be in. Also, understanding that the world is one, and mankind is citizens. If you're innovating and creating things, you're not creating it just down at the store on the corner. You're literally opened up to a huge market and an understanding of looking at different people. Also, every person has individual strengths, and there has to be a unity in the differences that exist. For example, there's an equality between women and men. We have to abolish all forms of prejudice, or you really can't work in a team that's dealing globally. And then we have to effectively consult with each other. And in my faith, in Baha'i faith, it gives us an insight into how to consult, a series of ground rules and principles by which to use, which I've used in making the innovation happen. Also, there's a unity between science and religion. That science, the principles of science and religion have to coexist, especially today, even more than before. As I go through the next set of things, you will see this coming through. I just figured it'd be worth identifying for you some of those and how they all fit together. So let's look at the driving forces that make innovation happen. What we're seeing is this dates back to a roundtable we ran back in 98? And we've run a number of them since then. And as we put people together, we asked the following question: what drives innovation for you and your organization, or for yourself? And what holds you back? What drives the person is generally business and technical issues and the mission of the organization. What stops it or opposes it or breaks it from happening is more the human and organizational issues. This repeated itself over and over and over again. So if I wish to look at it, and I wish to look at it from a standpoint of almost like a DNA molecule, what you see is the two strands that are there are usually technology and business issues. But the major thing that exists is the genetic code, which is the human piece. Any part of innovation you have, any place you're working, always rests on the type of people that you have. And do I have the right people for the type of innovation I'm looking for? If I don't know how to treat them and I can't leverage them, what I have is an implosion that takes place and these things dissolve. So for example, we live at a time of massive change, which is not strange, but we live at a very massive change time. So if I look at different corporations that we've had that have failed to innovate, you can see them here, a series of them, which many of them you probably know, because we all lived at this time when this occurred. So if I look at the disruption and why they failed to innovate, here's three of them. I'm not going to go through all three. I'm just going to take the top one, Kodak, which I know well. And what happened is, if you go back and see, was Kodak very innovative? Oh, if you go back 40 years, it was incredibly innovative. It was one of the most innovative companies on the planet. And then suddenly it stopped. And by the way, for those who don't know it, Kodak was the company that invented the digital camera. I don't know how many people knew that there, but that's a very important piece of information because they couldn't transition that from their film to the digital camera, even though they invented it. And the reason for that is basically the human dynamics. The people that were there basically wanted to stay with film. They were comfortable. And when you're comfortable with film and you're comfortable with things like that, basically what happens is you wind up staying where you are, which is fine if there's no massive change. But in this case, there was more massive change. And I was at the meeting where they stood up and said, well, basically, yeah, I know we developed a digital camera, but look at the images. They're not very good. Compared to film, they're pretty poor. I don't think this is going to affect us. This was in the 1980s. The person said, senior leader, I don't think that this is going to affect us till 2020. So we don't worry about this right now. If you think about what I'm saying, the Kodak issue. This is an issue of almost all organizations dealing with change. So whether I'm dealing with government, religious institutions, schools, military, all of them face the same thing with the disruption that's taking place. The question is, can I move towards the change? Can I deal with it? And in truth, what happens is, frankly, organizations don't innovate. People. Lots of times, because of my exposure to lots of innovation, people always ask me, tell me something, Bob. Tell me, what's the most innovative company you know? And I usually say to them, what time are we talking? And they say, what do you mean? I said, well, let's look at Kodak. Go back 40 years. That was probably one of the most innovative. Look at it now. It's hardly existing. And the question really is, it's not the organization, it's the people that innovate. And I need to be able to learn to leverage them. So if I go ahead and see, how can we make the invisible human elements visible to be able to foster innovation? One thing is that we've been endowed with talents and faculties. We have lots of positive things that exist within us. Can we see them and leverage them? Next thing is the invisible material elements, events, are interrelated with invisible spiritual forces. If we can't see the relationship between the two, it's sometimes hard to continue to innovate and to innovate things that are pertinent in the world. And the last thing that's here that we have on this one is when we take a look at science, the acquisition of science is basically making what's been concealed and unknown to us visible by our intellectual acumen and searching out the plane of the invisible to make the plane visible. So what we learn from this, from the spiritual teachings, is there's a series of things in us that are invisible. Can we make them visible? So if we make them visible, we have inventions, but we also have something else. We have a way to continue to innovate. So as I go ahead and look at this, and I look at things that are visible and invisible, I look at the visible as more like a resume or photographically gender, race, and the more closer to the invisible is also behavioral and psychological. And the three areas that are there, cognitive, affective, and cognitive, how I think, how I relate emotionally to another person, and cognitively, how I instinctively behave, are really critical pieces by which to make things work. So those, if I look at that, I'm looking at things that are skill sets, things I developed in what I would find on my resume, versus mindsets, which is personality preferences and ideas and attitudes towards things. So if I go back to that same chart and I look at it, I would see that it's a more of what's visible. And the mindsets are more the invisible. And now I make the invisible visible in order for me to be able to see these characteristics in a person. So let me share with you a story that relates back to this. It dates back a few years for me. I was 18 years old at the time. Yes, I only look a little older, but I'm really not. And what it comes down to is I was attending school in Iowa at Drake University. I went to my first chemistry class, and I was introduced to a periodic table. We went from earth, fire, air, water, spirit to something tangible they have created. The elements would attract each other. They would repel each other. They were gaseous, so they were solid. And I said, wow, what a way to organize the real form of the universe. What an interesting thing. So I became, by the way, but on top of that, I went to my first psych class. And after the third lecture, I went up to the prof and I said, excuse me, sir, could you please share with me the periodic table of people? He said, what? I said, a periodic table of people. Don't you have one? He said, oh, no, you can't do that. People are too complex. That's not possible to do. I said, really? That doesn't make any sense. He says, no, it's not possible. That bothered me since I was 18. And eventually, what I needed to do was to create that periodic table of people, which is the beginning. I started doing that with dealing with the ISPI, which I began to look at those invisible elements that make us up. So if you had and took the ISPI, some of you did, you would be able to look at the foundation report, and I'm going to reference certain pages. If you haven't taken it and you would like to take it after this, feel free to do so. And if you would like to get into more detailed discussion, my pleasure, but due to the timing, I'm going to keep it tight. So when I look at it, you can see the page number on the side. So the first page really has, in the foundation report, has those three circles. One is cognitive, the second is affective, and the third is cognitive. Think, how you feel, and how you instinctively behave. And from that, looking at the top one, cognitive one, it's talking about how you think and decide. You'll notice at the top of it, it has risk. And then it goes to how you generate ideas and how you decide things and etc. Then I got to make a decision. Then it goes into relating to people. Well, how much control do I want? How much am I willing to, do I want to relate to people, or do I want people to relate to me, or what am I going to do? And eventually I got to take an action. Am I a person that wants to take an immediate action, or am I more prudent and I want to wait before I do anything? So the instrument itself covers those 12, and it does it in a very short period of time. So what we have here is looking at what's called a totem on the left-hand side, and you can see the three parts of the brain that's there and the pieces where they cover. So I'm going to the totem, and you can see that grid, which by the way just got patented, which is kind of nice. And what we're looking at is looking at different things. For example, the first thing that you see up there, which is called innovation orientation, which is how I like to solve problems and how I like to innovate. Next is innovation orientation modifiers, which is basically how I like to play with others. How am I on teams? How I relate to people? Where am I? These instruments, as I mentioned before, are used globally and can be taken globally because the elements that make it up are the elements that are part of people. So we're going to start looking at the top one, and I may touch base on the second version, the second piece, but let's start up there and see how much time we have. When we look at this, the innovation orientation is like a lens. You look through that lens and you see the world because that's the way you see it. Then you can put filters in front of it, which then modifies the way you see the world, which we'll cover as well. So let's look at that IO. For IO, innovation orientation, you can see here a grid, and it says XB on one side all the way to XP, and vertically it says ideation, risk, and process. And by the way, if you have your booklet, you'd be able to look at page 3 and 4 and see this there, plus a write-up on your feedback. But if I look at that, the B stands for builder, the P stands for pioneer, and the MB and MP are what we call connectors. Ideation is the generation of ideas. Risk is how much risk am I willing to take? And process is how do I set things up for me to do things? And I'm going to be giving you some more information on that, but I'd like to first start looking at builder and pioneer. There you go. There's your totem.
Yeah, this is the result of mine that I did.
Thank you. So if I go a little further now and look, I'm going to now look at builder, connector, and pioneer. A builder is a type of person that likes to improve things and optimize. A connector likes to look at things differently and pushes the boundaries. A pioneer likes to create new. So if you give them a problem, they solve it and then they morph the problem and start looking at lots of different things. With those, they have a series of characteristics that make them up. So for the builder likes to improve things, but they're also seen as efficient, stable, and focused. As you think about that, you probably know people, if you're not one of them, that's like that. The connector, which sees things differently and sees both sides of this, is seen as adaptable, very practical, and very agile. The pioneer, on the other end, likes to create new, sees the boundary, and goes out of the boundary. They're seen as very radical, unconventional, and spontaneous, and I'll go more into that. So if you start thinking about it, do you know anyone on your team or that you work with or you live with that lives in these categories? You probably do. And if you looked on page 8, what you would see with the line that's in the center, you would see where you fall on that spectrum, which we can talk about. So going back and going a little further, when you take a look at an ISPI of a builder, connector, and pioneer, one person is not better than the other. Is the builder better than the pioneer? No, or vice versa. And when you look at this, and if you look at what makes this up, here's a series of scientists that fit this spectrum. One of them is Herschel, who's an astronomer, deals with lots of details, and created the star charts, which we then navigated in our ships. And the other end of the spectrum is Leonardo da Vinci, which we probably know more in the West, and he generates extremely novel thought, extremely diverse artists, as well as, actually, if you should understand, he also created the first helicopter. So you're looking at a person who is very versatile, but doesn't implement, where on the other end of the spectrum, they implement. So this spectrum that exists not just for this. This is what's very interesting with this. It literally deals with any family has this. Any church has this. We have all this spectrum that's present, and we have to learn how to leverage it. So different people excel at different things. Okay? If that makes any sense to you. And when we take a look at this, and we go across here to look at, this is an innovation spectrum, ranging from evolutionary, expansionary, to revolutionary. And what's happening there is evolutionary is you have improvement. You improve things. Expansionary, you improve things but push out the boundaries. Revolutionary, you may improve things but you really redefine the problem. So let me give you an example. If I look at evolutionary, I could take a grocery store and I can improve the shelves in it so it's easier for people to buy things. And it literally is an innovation because it improves what's going on and attracts more people. If it's expansionary, it may be going from the creation of grocery stores into restaurants. And I go to the restaurant to eat. Revolutionary may be something like Grubhub or an Uber, which now brings the food to you as compared to having it there. Each of them have different steps, and each can literally be used in many, many different ways. But the evolutionary, expansionary, and revolutionary, the mindset is builder, connector, and pioneer. And for those who relate back into industry, here's 3 different types of industries at different goals that are present for different people. So the first one on top, you'll see is a consumer good company. They need people who deal with evolution or builders. And it's necessary to have them. And they have a large percentage of that. Creating new that is really out of the box, well, I need someone there that can think that way, but that's not really where I invest my funds. I need to optimize, which is more builder-like, evolutionary, and expansionary. If I drop to the bottom to the technology company, I need less evolutionary people, less builders, and I need more pioneers, which you can see revolutionary, like went from 2% in consumer good to 15%. Because I must continue to create new since the change takes place. If I don't have them and I haven't set up the systems to do it, and I don't have the people who think that way, it's going to be very, very difficult to sustain myself in being able to do it. Is this making any sense? You can shake your heads. Okay. Anyway, let me keep going. So if I go along, and I now go back to looking at ideation, risk, and process, let me describe that to you. And it goes like this. Ideation, if I'm a builder, I generate novel thought that solves the problem, and then I go from that to go do it. If I'm a mid-range or a connector, I like to solve the problem and push out the boundaries slightly. If I'm a pioneer, you give me the problem, I solve the problem, and then I morph it and start doing other things. So if you come back to the pioneer, a couple of days later, he's still working on the problem, or she is, and she's trying to figure out what to do because they changed the problem in their head. It's a very unique form. When we take a look at risk, builders de-risk things. So you want things to work well. If I'm building a blood analyzer, I really want some builders on that. The mid-range in risk can see risk that's on the pioneering side and the building side. And depending on the situation, they're very situationally dependent. The pioneer or extreme pioneer in risk doesn't necessarily see risk. Let me share with you a story. A number of years ago, I was lecturing at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. I'm in a big room with a U, like many of us have been in for meetings. Person to the right stands up and says, "Excuse me, you have me as an extreme pioneer in risk. I don't take risk." I said, "You don't?" "No, I don't." "Okay, well, maybe the instrument's wrong," which it could be. He said, "Yeah, but I wanted you to know." I said, "Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that." I turned around and looked at the room. Everyone in the room was covering their mouth like this, looking down at the floor, and there must have been something up. So I turned to him and said, "Tell me something. These people know you." He said, "Oh, yeah, they know me." "Can I ask them if you take risk?" He says, "Go right ahead. You should ask them." I said, "Okay. Well, this is why I remember. Well, does this guy take risk?" They started to laugh so hard. Two people fell on the floor, pounding the floor. One person stood up and said, "Remember the time you jumped out of the airplane without a parachute?" and started listing off this stuff this guy did. At the end of that, he stood up and said, "You know, I can see why you might think that stuff is risky, but frankly, I don't." So one person's risk is another person's conservatism. And depending on what function I'm looking at, I need someone either taking risk or de-risking. Very useful to know where everyone stands on the team. Next, if I look at process, a builder sets up processes that are external to themselves. A pioneer sets up processes that are internal to themselves. Let me describe that to you. I go into a builder's office and I pulled out a drawer on the right-hand side where we all keep file folders. One, they're going to be loaded with file folders. Two, if he's an extreme builder, there might be color-coded. You can find anything there. If I go into a pioneer's office on the other side, what I see is piles of paper everywhere. Because the pioneer files the stuff inside them, so they know where everything is. It's not in a drawer, it's inside. So if you went in and said, "Gee, do you have that paper on risk you talked about the other day?" "Oh yeah, let me look around." "Oh yeah, here it is." Their worst enemy is the people who clean the desk. They move things around and they're screwed. So that gives you a sense of what this is with innovation. and look at the way you see creativity. So let me go a little further and illustrate it. What you see here is, you notice the red box. It's in the pioneer or extreme pioneer in ideation and risk. We have a special name for those people. They're called literally pingers. And this is an illustration of it. They can be a pioneer or extreme pioneer in ideation and risk, and they can be anywhere in process. That affects the way they process things, but who these pingers are they actually see things outside of the box. So they're people who think out of the box. If you give them an idea, they'll associate that idea with something that may or may not be relevant. They like to push the boundaries on things. They basically disrupt the status quo. So if the status quo is getting disrupted by them, they're usually people chase after them. They're very strong at creativity, and they continue to design and come up with new ideas. Many of these people are more mavericks that you know. Here's some of them as examples of mavericks that existed at different points in time. They're in every culture, everywhere. How the cultures accept them will vary, because like if you're in one culture that really deals with lots of details and wrong, like possibly Austria, you would have a different type of insight to these as you do the United States. Another good example is looking at this series of pairs. Notice that you have Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and you have Walt and Roy Disney, and you have Orville and Wilbur Wright. Let me explain what that means. Let's take Walt and Roy Disney. I'm sure everyone here has heard of Walt Disney, Mickey Mouse and all the other stuff. But I'm not sure you've heard of Roy. Roy is his brother. Walt went bankrupt twice, and after the second bankruptcy, Roy stepped in and said, I'm going to take over running the business. You keep creating. Roy was more builder, and literally set up the system that allow us to have Walt Disney. And we wouldn't have the things we have, even though he may have invented, been very creative, but they would never have been innovative. Other examples like that are like Orville and Wilbur Wright, brothers that created flight. There's a long story with that too. And when you think of it, you may know two people that literally work together that are like that. And that really allows you to develop business, it allows you to develop teams that are much more effective if they appreciate who the other person is. That becomes very, very, very important. So as we go ahead here and look at this, if you went to page 3 and 4, you would read a description of how you fell on this. And I'm unfortunately, due to time, I'm not going to stop here to do that. But if we have a chance at the end, let's do it. What I'm sensitive to is we have a period of time before I see where we are. Okay? Okay, Vafa? Good. So if I go ahead now and look at this, and I'm now going to go ahead and look at the IOMs, the modifiers. Remember how I like to play with others? And when I look at the IOMs, I'm going back here to the totem. And if you recall, we looked at the top part of the totem, and now we're going to look at the bottom part, which deals with the way we like to interact with other people. It's really much more of our sets of different mindsets. And if I look at this, I'm going to see the different pieces that make it up. This piece, right after it, control, relationship, and networking, is really the feeling of how I interact with another person. So control, relationship, and network, you'll see have a no, flex, yes. Yes means, yep, I want to do this. No means, no, I don't. Yeah, flex means, well, maybe, depends on the situation. By the way, this write-up is on page 5 for you. So just to illustrate this, to control, I initiate control. If I'm a yes, that means I want to run the show. If I'm a no, no, I don't. If it's a flex, it depends on the situation. Others initiating control. If it's a yes, I'm open to having people share with me where they're coming from. If it's a no, no, I'm not. If it's a flex, it depends. And when we look at relationship and networking, excuse me, what we're looking at there is relationship. How much depth do I get to know you? If I'm a yes and I initiate, I really want to go out and meet new people. If I'm a yes and others initiating, I would really be very open to people approaching me. Same with networking, but networking is more of a veneer. Checking to see how I relate across that spectrum. So when I go networking, I go to a party or I go to an event or I go to something, I get to know lots of different people, but not in depth. But it helps me in connecting up with people, especially in business and also in friendships. So you're able to see where you fall on that, which allows you to see how I will relate to another person. Very important when putting together teams. And we have courses that relate back to this to teach people teaming. Another one that sits here, the last part, is more of your like mental model pieces. And due to time, I just want to share with you quickly what this is saying. Input has to deal with, do I like to take the big picture in first? Or do I like to deal with details, concrete? Am I a person in flow that I like to look at lots of options? Or am I a person who's convergent, which wants to focus down and get something done? In my passion, which is conative, do I like to take immediate action on something? I got this brand new idea, let me go do it. Or am I prudent? Well, I want to weigh it before I go do it, make sure it's right. Or depends on the situation. If I'm making a decision, do I make a decision based on my heart, which relates to others, people? Or am I making a decision purely based on logic, which is head? Flex, you go up and back. And finally, for energy, if I'm exhausted and I come home from work and I'm a people person, I want to talk to someone. They may be at home, they may be on the phone, there may be some, because I get energy by being with people. If I'm self-based, I get energy by being alone and recharge that way. When you put all these together, you get the entire totem. And each of them are independent variables. And you can put together different types of people, which become very understanding those invisible elements these are that make up a person. So let's wrap up and take a look at how does innovation promote an ever-advancing civilization? And basically, it works like this. The natural laws and methods that exist are hidden in the universe. Humans have an intellectual acumen that searches out the invisible plane and makes it visible. And when they expose it to making it visible, they find a way to use it. A good example of that is electricity. When you think of that, it was invisible, still is, but we use it. And that's why what we do is we capture it and imprison it, so to speak, so as to make it something we use. So once again, we're taking the invisible and making it visible, just like we need to find the right people, looking at the invisible and making it visible. So one thing I'd like to share in closing is nothing endures but change. There is nothing permanent except change. All is in flux. Nothing stays still. Interesting quote, but more importantly, it's 500 BC. So if you think we're going through tough times with change, we as a species have this a long stretch of time. And it's important to innovate in order to stay with what's occurring. So in summary, how is the Baha'i faith innovative? It taught me those principles, but very importantly, where does it fit on the innovation continuum? So as you start to look at things, the Baha'i faith teaches there's only one God. Mankind is one. All religions are one. We have the same spiritual foundation. This occurred in the 1880s. Let me share with you how that's completely revolutionary. If you talk to people, they'll tell you that, what do you mean? No, my God's right, not yours. Mankind is one. No, those people No. We're right. Our tribe here is one, not them. This is opening up the foundation of the globe to us. And it's the evolution of religion to move towards this as the different ones who manifest the spirit of God on earth, the Christ, the Buddhas, and most recently Baha'u'llah, that give us that understanding each time of the time we live in. We must understand the global nature. We also have a series of social teachings that fall on this innovation continuum as well, that must be lived so that innovation can occur, like the equality of women and men, the unity of science and religion, the elimination of all forms of prejudice. Think about what that's saying in light of everything that's going on today. Having a universal language so we can talk to each other. Elimination of extremes of poverty and wealth. These are just some of them. What's important here is to understand as we grow in the innovation, it's bringing together the spiritual and material. And the instrument that I shared with you helps us understand conflict resolution, dealing with innovation strategies, leadership development, culture. It makes it visible for you. What's important is, as it makes it visible there, it also makes it very visible to use this in your family, to use it in community life. It eliminates and addresses the issue of understanding and accepting and appreciating differences in people. I don't know about you, but when I went to school, they never taught me that. They never taught me a language by which to have that. We now have the elements, the invisible elements that will help us. So in wrapping this is a quote by Henry Ford. He said, "Coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success." I wish you all happy innovating and enjoy your spiritual journey. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bob. Appreciate it. If you want to stop sharing your screen, then
Sure.
we can bring up everybody and I can kind of follow everybody that may have questions or thoughts. Friends, as you know, you can put up your hand digitally if you would like, or put a question in the chat box. We already have a question in the chat box, Bob.
Can I do one thing?
Yeah, sure.
You can notice here, this totem that's here, this is a totem of the 10 people that took the tool. So you actually can start to accumulate or cum the data. What's important here is to be able to see what team I have, what makes them up, what's their strengths, what's their blind spots, how do we help them?
So this is the composite of 10 people
that are here.
who received the email and actually went to the link and took it?
Yes, that's correct. And if you want to, I can email that back over to you. You can email it out to them. Okay.
That's interesting. Well, I'm assuming they already downloaded their own individual report, but this is good, interesting to see the composite of everyone that took it.
Yes, very much so.
All right, thank you. So one question from Neil that says, it moved. Is there some connection and common ideas overlapping in ISPI and Enneagram personality types?
I'm sure there are. And the reason for that is we call the Enneagram, their types, archetypes. You'll see the same type of, you see archetypes by Jung. You'll also see archetypes that are in the Tao Te Ching, as well as in every faith has an archetype. So in the Western world we live in, if I said to you, this person is Christ-like, you would know what I'm saying. And each of them, the Enneagram has each of the personalities that are possible that were laid out. I think it's Sufi tradition. It came out of.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
So friends, yeah, if you want to put up your hand digitally or send a question in the chat group, by all means. Bob, one question is, as we look at what's going on in the world today, and we see that, you know, people are trying to come together to make decisions about change and transformation, whether they're in community activism, whether you know, they're in politics, even in the corporate world. I mean, most recently, the president and CEO of Verizon posted a video. There was a post of a video that he did meeting with his senior leadership team, and he's literally in tears as he is talking about the situation of the world and what they're committing to do with Verizon and the tens of millions they're going to contribute to agencies and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to see how, you know, these making the invisible visible can help improve the way that these groups, these constituencies, you know, the politicians, the community activists, etc., can make better decisions. Can you help us kind of see the relationship? What are the challenges today that are where we're not seeing the invisible, and therefore we're experiencing the difficulties we are, if that makes sense?
Sure, makes a lot of sense. If you take a look at different organizations, whether it be political or private sector or different forms of governmental, if we do not have an appreciation for the uniqueness of people, if we don't have a language for it, we continue to go down the same pathway we've been before, because we're not given a way to describe the differences and appreciate the differences. It isn't just, what's my difference? It's appreciate the differences. So I'll illustrate it for you. I was starting to talk to you about Mosaic Partnerships, which we did quite a number of years ago and continue to do. What we have found is when we paired up people across racial and ethnic lines, and we paired them, we did a very unique thing. What we did is match their internal makings using an ISPI and other things like that, that allow us to match the two people who have similar insides and different outsides. When you do that, people are actually talking to each other, but they're actually able to understand because it's the same that's in them. And then the differences are easier to deal with. Those are people that have lasted for a very long time in their friendships. When we've used this in organizations, we create what we call a relay race, ranging from people who are much more pioneering to those that are much more builder. So you generate novel thought through the pioneer, and then it moves into mid-range, and then it moves to builder to make it implementable. The key to this is identifying those people and also teaching the people that are part of the organization to appreciate the differences and see the strengths of those differences so we could leverage them. Lots of times we say, oh, we're looking for innovation to occur, for example. So all we're interested in is breakthrough, right? Just breakthrough. And the answer is no, that doesn't do it all. That starts it, but can't finish it. So what we need to be able to do is understand the differences in people and how to leverage it. If we don't understand that, we continue through the cycle we've been in before. I don't know if I answered, but any other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, sorry, Bob. How there's a couple more here, but how does this preconceived notion, prejudice, it's not just racial or
no, it's prejudice.
It's just the idea of a preconceived notion in a decision-making process or in the field of innovation or in the field of trying to create transformation. Do you have some examples of how, preconceived notions can have adverse impacts, or how, when we've tried to remove prejudice or preconceived notions, we've actually got to better outcomes and better change?
I definitely can do that. Let me give you, I gave you one before looking at Kodak.
Right.
That was a preconceived notion. They couldn't break the pattern. They couldn't identify the need and the type of people that were needed to get them out of where they were. That's why they had their problem. And by the way, so did a number of other organizations. So let me give you an example of one, and the company doesn't mind us using, and if anyone's interested, they just recently published a paper on it, where it's Raytheon. And they were trying to deal with the disruption that was taking place technically. And so what they wound up doing was taking their top 100 and some odd people at the time, top innovators, take them off site and have them generate novel thought. And after a period of time, like a week, they invited to come back the investors from Boston, because these people were actually down in Florida. And the investors from Boston came in and talked to them and bet on two ideas. And the two ideas were evolutionary. And if you remember, evolutionary, expansionary, revolutionary. And they wanted revolutionary or expansionary to revolutionary. And so a year passed and they started to do it again. And this time they invited a company to come in and talk about to do things in a creative way. Deal with brainstorming, brainwriting, all sorts of things that you can use the different techniques. And at the end, I'm summarizing this, at the end of the week, the investors came in and they bet on two again. And they were between evolutionary to expansionary, but none of them were expansionary, and they definitely weren't revolutionary. So they called on us because we put in an office of innovation at Raytheon, which still exists now. And they said, could you help us figure out how to do this? And we answered saying, I think so, but I'm not sure. Let's try. So we took the same people and tested them all in the ISPI and divided them up in teams, ranging from those that were pioneer and extreme pioneer. So they had thoughts that were really out of the box, and then moved it to the more mid-range and then builder. When we did that, the pioneers, if you ask them for 5 ideas, they wind up giving you 10 or 15. They can't help it. It's part of what they do. So they came up with this, and then we were able to move it to the next group, moving it down to more from extreme pioneer to mid-range pioneer, and start to focus on the ones that were possible to get implemented. When they did this and they developed it, when the bankers came to bet again, this time they bet on 9. And they said, whoa, wait a second. How'd you do that? And then I started to explain about the psychometrics that make up the instrument. And they said, no psychobabble. We're not interested. We're double E's. We're electrical engineers. We don't deal with this. Okay. I said, let's wait a year. A year passes. And lo and behold, of the 9, 7 are still alive, 3 are getting launched. And they said, whoa, let's try again. But maybe you can explain it to us without psychometrics. I said, okay, being a chemist, I could do this. So anyway, so what happened was they do it again, and we lined them up again as a team. We learned more about who the team is and able to optimize that. And this time, instead of investing in 9, the bankers invested in 11. And they said, okay, now you got to help us out. How'd you do this, but do not go into psychometrics? I said, okay. Well, all you don't know is I have 7 children. Actually, really neat group. 5 of them are adopted, and they're multiracial, multi-ethnic. And at Thanksgiving time, the family comes over, and then also we now have 10 grandchildren, and they bring friends. So let's put it this way, there's a mob. 2 of my kids come with me. And they said, how is this related to what you did? You didn't want psychometric. No, go ahead, keep going. I said, okay, 2 of my kids come down, we make turkey. We make 2 turkeys, and I make gravy. I'm a chemist, I know how to do that. He said, yeah. So when you make gravy, you take a pan, you put the drippings on the bottom of the pan. Yeah. Then you put flour in and you disperse it. Yeah. Then you take the flavorful fluid and you pour it in and stir it up and heat it. And what do you get? You said you get good gravy. Right. Okay. So what's this have to do with anything? I said, wait a second. Let's say I have a pan. Yeah. I pour the flavorful fluid first. Then I put the drippings on top of the flavorful fluid. Yeah. Then I throw the flour in. Same ingredients. Stir it up. What do I get? They said, you get yuck. I said, that's right. That's what you've been doing. You get yuck. You have all the right ingredients. You just haven't put it in the right order for you to be able to make gravy. And they said, you can actually see the difference. Yes, that's right. And you can leverage it. And it's like making gravy. They're at this now 10 years. And they use this and they've developed software with it, etc. That's an example of having something work like that wasn't working. A lot of it has to do, and I can go into creating archetypes using the tool itself and being able to identify different sets of people. The importance here is understanding that everyone has strengths. The question to me is, as leaders, how do I leverage them? And that's really, I must understand, so to speak, the periodic table of people. So
it's possible for us to actually have a lot of people that are well-intentioned, may have special interests or special passions or commitments, etc., come together and put out more yuck than they are the gravy.
Yep.
Now, and not by any fault other than...
No, it's not their fault. Everyone would blame them, but that doesn't mean it's their fault.
Right.
Leadership hasn't organized it correctly. You're right.
Right. So is it possible, maybe even necessary, how you describe, builder, connector, pioneer, and you had evolutionary, expansionary, and revolutionary. Is there a relationship between the outcome, the transformation, the change in society, etc., the way we operate and the way we work, the way we think? Is there a relationship between the outcome and the presence of these dimensions? Meaning
Yes.
that the tighter the correlation between the builder, connector, and pioneer, or the tighter the correlation between evolutionary, expansionary, revolutionary, then the better the outcome. Does that make sense?
Yes, but what you're saying is, if I hear you correctly,
Yeah, correct me. Yeah.
I'm looking at evolutionary type of ideas. I really need the builders to help me there.
Right.
If I throw the pioneers in, they'll disrupt it. I may want to start with some of the pioneers and then have them go out to lunch and then bring the builders that will focus on the things that make sense. It's part of understanding people.
Right.
Makes it, and what it does is I appreciate, as we go through this, you appreciate the builder, the connector, and the pioneer, and all sorts of other archetypes. There's also another booklet that comes with this called an archetypes booklet to share with you what archetypes you are, and then also seeing the archetypes that you can possibly use. It's not all the archetypes, it has some of them.
Yeah, so how many times have any of us been in meetings where somebody comes up with an idea and it's immediately shut down by someone else who says, oh, we can't do that. Well, no, because of this and this and this and this. And then you come up with something else and so no, we can't do that either because of this and this and this and this. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
Yes, it is. And all you need to do to fix that is put the right people in the room to start.
Right. So this idea of, that's kicking around now in the US, defunding the police, for example, it's, look, it's less about the idea and it's more about the sequence of things, the combination of people and talent that you're putting together and the journey that they will go through, so that, because based on that, we know the outcome will be optimal, right? So it's how we get there that becomes more important, because we know that the more proficient and effective we are in how we get there, the better the outcome is going to be.
Yes, but here's a very important thing.
Right.
If you remember the story of Kodak,
Right.
plus stories, they had the answer in the organization, and they couldn't do it because their personal biases blocked them.
Right.
In the same way in our society, we have to put people together who can break that bond, that frozen piece for us, and introduce us to something else and have it roll down. We call it a relay race. From the pioneer coming up with it, you can't go from the pioneer, an extreme pioneer, to the builder. It doesn't work.
Right.
You have to design it and let it roll through.
Okay.
In a similar way, how difficult it is for people who are, I'll give you an example. If you take a look at the time of Christ, how many of the Jews recognized Christ? Not many. Okay, if you go forward and go further on, I come from a Jewish background. That's why, and I can tell you some interesting stories. But anyway, the piece to me, it's very important, is a new manifestation comes. Does everyone embrace it? No. We hold on to where we've been. It's hard for us to shift. That's why leadership has to understand, how do I use the beauty of people to get us to where we're going?
Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry, man.
Friends, anyone? Yeah. Oh, Ming and Jim. Great. Go ahead.
Hey, Bob. This is Jim Wong here. Thank you very much for your talk. I appreciate it. You know, as you're going through all that discussion, I'm reminded by another great thinker and author by the name of Clay Christensen. I'm sure you've read his.
Of course, yes.
And one of the things that he talks about in terms of innovation of some of these companies, or lack of pursuing that innovation, is that, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, so pardon me if I get this wrong, but they're trapped by essentially their own customers, their own motives, their own agency type of needs. You know, maybe it's not Kodak, but maybe another company couldn't innovate because they will lose their current customers, is one example. And as I think about the change that we need to bring about in today's society, I would say there are many agents who are in positions of power that won't allow innovation because they lose that power. What are some of your thoughts to break this logjam?
Well, one of the ways, my thoughts, is the extreme pioneers may be able to generate stuff, but they're not the people who are able to transfer it to the clients. You also need people who relate from a relationship standpoint or networking standpoint, and very open to listen to what their client has to say to translate that. If I don't do that, I don't really understand what they need. I can bring back the needs to the people who are more out of the box and let them figure out what to do. But they won't, and them engaging with the client will be sometimes difficult. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
It does. Essentially, you're saying a group of people, they because of the way they create, or the way they ideate, they think in terms that are unlike other people, and you need those people in the middle who can translate. You need essentially those connectors who can translate, is your point.
Yeah, that's correct. And the connect has to talk to the client.
Bob, I see you raise your hand.
I lean towards connector, but a little more of a, I think if I remember right, Bob, I was a little more of a builder than pioneer than a builder. But I'm pretty well a connector. I'm a switchboard. Connect through me.
Actually, that's exactly right. That allows for the translations to take place.
Yeah, but I only speak English and Farsi, so yeah.
I speak Brooklynese. So
There you go.
yeah,
Thank
I
you.
come from Brooklyn. Way back.
There is a question here from Deborah in the chat box. Is how can we use this information and these insights to help the global community, and I would think it applies to any community, really share this message of oneness of humanity. Like, how can we, as you said, there are still people today that don't think in terms of, you know, there's a lot of pushback against globalization. There's a lot of pushback against one human family. There's a lot of pushback against, you know, the world is one country and mankind is citizens. You know, is there a way for us to use these insights and help, you know, elevate that aspect of understanding the process of, you know, advancing human civilization? Because we also, that's another dimension, right? Is, do you want to be revolutionary? Do you want to be evolutionary?
Well, I think what you can take is what this is saying and the elements that make it up. You would be able to see, being able to look at people. I didn't have a chance to go into the depth of that,
Sure.
but it would be very useful to you to understand the different type of archetypes that would exist and literally how to teach someone about this. What happens is, if you think of it, we need to be able to share with people what this is saying. So I'll give you a short story. If it gets too long, let me know, Vafa.
Okay.
I'm in Barcelona giving a talk on innovation. And it's to about, 100, 150 people, a lot of people. And I wrap up the talk talking about the innovation strength preference indicator and the differences in people and the importance of that. After some questions, there's a raise of the hand. There's a woman in the front. She says, "Excuse me, do you think I could take that instrument? I'd like to take it." I said, "Okay, sure, I'll give you a link." And then suddenly I look in the room, and strangely enough, everyone's leaning forward like this. And I said, uh-oh. So I said, "Okay, how many people here would like to take this instrument?" Everyone raised their hand. Now, all the people are from China, India, parts of Africa, throughout Europe, US, South America, and I believe Canada. And so you got this whole globe there. I said, "Okay, here's the deal. I'll let you take it on one condition." This is what it is. If you take it, you have to take it. And tonight, we're all going to come back here after dinner. I'm going to go through a debrief with you so you can understand this, because it's important to understand what you've taken. Everyone raised their hand and said, "Sure, we'll do it." Well, I didn't know whether they would, but nevertheless, they showed up after dinner, and I went through a briefing. And then as we went through it, you can see the looks on the face. Everyone's starting to get what this is saying. The person who asked for it first raised their hand. She said, "Excuse me, you have 64 questions here, and this describes me pretty accurately." I said, "Oh, okay, thank you." She said, no, don't answer that. Now my next question. She stands up, looks at the whole group, and she says, "How many people here feel it describes you fairly accurately?" Everyone raised a hand. So she said, "Okay, help me out here. We got people from all over the world. English in many of the cases as a second language. They all take this and they're saying this is part of who they are. This describes them fairly accurately. How'd you do that with 64 questions?" I have to tell you what I said to myself. That's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that. But what came to me, which was very simple, was what we were doing. We were looking at the elements that make up people. And it doesn't matter where you are on the globe. Who you are then filters through the culture that you're living in. So what's valued maybe is very much related to the culture and the wiring inside. Everyone sat there and they went, "Yeah, that makes a lot of sense." So part of what I've learned is if the person experiences it, you can actually help them understand the oneness of humankind. Because if you have all these people that have taken it, we've had, I think it's over 25,000 that have taken it. And we're now entering into where we're looking at testing thousands at a time, like we're doing some work with the Air Force. Because what we really need to be able to do is appreciate the differences in people. If I can't appreciate that differences, we're really at a loss right now in the country and in the world. This is one of the tools by which to get there. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Any other questions, friends? Any other thoughts? We're up at 9:22.
If I can raise one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anyone here who wants to take this now that they haven't taken it, please go and take the link we sent you so you can take it. And Vafa, if you wish to, or anyone else says, please, we can set up a separate time and I will go through your report with you so you can actually see what it is. What I did was give you a very quick overview, but not much of the details that make that up.
Yeah, and as I tried to show before, I've actually done this. I did this a long time ago. You'll see, you know, that's me, Bafa. These are my results. I know exactly where I fall and where I am. But before we kind of slowly come to a conclusion about, is it possible for someone over time to change and be different?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've done studies where we were working with a group called MODA, M-O-D-A, Ministry of Defense Advisors, which we gave them all the instrument up front. And then they had 3 weeks of training before they were deployed actually to Afghanistan to help the Afghanistans get to where they want, not where our government wants or anything else, but to help the people. When we did that, we confirmed with them that the instrument did actually say who they were. After the 3 weeks, they went to a camp outside of Indianapolis called Camp Atterbury, which was then set up as an Afghan village. And they went there for 3 days of intensive training, living in the environment they would be going into. To say the least, they were stressed. At the end of the 3rd day, we had them come into a room and take the instrument again. It takes 15 minutes. And then we did a gap analysis and asked them, went back and gave feedback to them about, was this really describing you in the situation you were in? On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 was perfect, 1 was They scored an average of 4.3, and everything was between 4 to 5.
Right.
They were then able to see in the instrument where the changes occurred in them, and then plan for themselves when they enter into that environment. When it feels that way, they have to have a strategy how they're going to deal. That's one. Another is when you look at it, age affects this. So if you get 20 years older, depending on what you're facing and stresses, certain pieces in it are more stable than others. That's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, because I think of myself, maybe when I was younger, I was maybe more revolutionary and more of a pioneer. But as I've gotten older and life experience and so on, I've become more of a connector and more of a expansion orientation then.
It also is a change as you age. Your hormones shift, and that affects the way you see life. For us that are a little older, we can understand that really well.
Right.
But what is very important is to see it. I've done this because of the 7 children. What was very interesting for me was I actually tested them going through before and after puberty, watching shifts occur. My kids would tell me, Dad's always testing us, and our friends that come over, they want to take these too. So I had a live lab. And very, very fascinating. I learned a lot.
I'm sure. This has been great. Yeah. So one comment here. I think you all see it. It's great. Neil says, just took the test, excellent self-assessment. Thank you. Stan, hi Stan. A similar test is needed for police forces. I think, you know, it's a test that if it's helping us gain an understanding that once applied in the right way can be a important influencer in transformation and change. I think that's essentially what we're talking about here. So, Bob, thank you very much. If there's no more questions, friends, appreciate everybody. I always got to do a shout out to Fadia because she dials in from Jordan and it's an ungodly hour in the morning for her. Hey. Hi, Fadia. Nice to see you. And everybody else who's participated, thank you for continuing to participate. We're very happy to put these together and have everybody come and share, and really hope to elevate the level of conversation to have more meaningful conversations. And so when we go away from these sessions, you know, the content of our language could change, the way we think about things can be different.
And Vafa, if anyone has any questions or would like to go through their instrument, please let me know.
Yeah. We'll let you know. Yeah, anybody, please let me know. Just reach out to me by email. I'm happy to connect you with Bob, and you know, he'll spend time with you and go over your the results of your study. So, friends, thank you very much. I do want to say the next one, which is not going to be on June 21st because that's Father's Day. So I'm making an executive decision as a father. We're not going to hold no, but it's just the turnout on Mother's Days and Father's Days and long weekends is really low. So we're not going to have one. We will have one on the 28th of June. Just keep that in mind. Sunday, 28th of June is going to be Layli Miller talking about justice. She's the founder of the Tahrir Justice Center out of Washington, D.C. She does a lot of speaking on and leadership on the subject of justice, which I think is pretty apropos. So anyways, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and bless you all. Stay healthy and safe, please. Thank you.